So I'm here with a video that's going to be a start of a new series on my channel, which is a series of videos where I talk about some art and or pop culture acts and their decisions, business or art decisions that I think were a good idea or a bad idea for them. This is purely just my opinion, obviously. I want to start this series by talking about music promotions that hurt the release instead of helping it along. Like promotional tracks, promotional teasers before the release of a project. Usually an album. Even more specifically, I want to talk about promotion cycles that are way too long. I'm going to use as an example the 1975, their second and their last albums. Music promotion in general has changed dramatically in the past few years. That is pretty obvious. The speed of information is incredibly fast. So how can an artist and their team create a promotional plan that will bring the most attention to the project? Recently, the 1975, a British pop rock band, have released a new record. And even though I am a fan of their music, especially their sophomore album, I was curious as to why I did not notice or know about the release date of their latest album. I knew that it was coming, but it just felt like it was coming forever. So I kind of just tuned it out completely, even though I really like their music. Usually I'm aware of release dates for many artists, even artists that I don't really care for that much. I still kind of remember it because maybe not the exact dates, but I kind of know the week or the month that the project is going to be released because it kind of stays in your mind if it's close enough to the release date when they start doing promotional activities. But I have started to notice that I miss some releases, and all of them have something very similar to each other. And those are promotion cycles that are too long. Don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about promotion cycles after the release when they go and do interviews, performances, and meet and greets or anything like that. I am talking about the build-up of the anticipation, which I personally really like that time of the release. I know that a lot of people don't really like the teaser era because it's always very agonizing to wait for something that you're anticipating. But I think that if it's done right, it feels very exciting, but it doesn't make you wait forever. So this build-up of anticipation, I would like to call that phenomenon an anticipation fatigue. Many artists, especially bands for some reason recently, have been falling into this pattern of behavior of promotions that follow this graphic that I made, okay? You have the anticipation level on the y-axis, and you have the time on the x-axis. And then you have this periods of time where there's a release of a single, maybe a release of some teasers. With the case of the 1975, they started releasing image teasers every single day for their last two albums, to the point where it just didn't feel like anything was coming. It just felt like it was the same thing happening over and over again. So the first teaser, a big one, let's say it's the lead single, is released. The hype is growing, as we can see on the graphic. Like the hype definitely grew. Let's say it's going up with time. We're gonna just assume that because sometimes actually it dies down because of the time, but let's say that it does grow over time and more things are being released. Eventually though, this constant high becomes the new norm of anticipation because it's spread for such a long period of time. Usually to keep the hype going, more and more singles are being released before the album date. Releasing more and more tracks leads to this issue where more than half, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less, but usually about a half of the album is already released and already out there. Especially in many cases, the most annoying thing is that all of the good tracks are also being released, leaving only maybe one good track on the album for later. Sometimes you just have a bunch of filler tracks left, really, because a lot of the bands have track lists that are way too long, that are not trimmed down enough, that are not being just hacked mercilessly. which I think you should be doing if you're doing a release that you're counting on in terms of like production and stuff like that. I think you can release an extended play, deluxe edition or something like that with a bunch of crap on it that is kind of more for the fans who really enjoy the sound of the band. But you have to be more focused on your main effort because you're trying to get more people into your music. At least I'm assuming that's what you're doing, considering the amount of resources that go into making an album. Now, when the album is released, because the hype has been up for so long, the release feels underwhelming, anticlimactic. It feels disappointing, regardless of the quality of the actual product. So let's look at the examples. I compiled some numbers. There's no actual research regarding this, so I kind of had to collect numbers myself. It's not that many numbers. I'm just looking at the 1975. I'm looking at 2 albums only. This could be, of course, one of the cases where the numbers don't point at a solid pattern. If you have any information on that, if you have some kind of studies that I could look into, please let me know. But this is just me compiling numbers and comparing them myself. And also just being a fan of the group and realizing that I myself am losing interest when it's such a long promotional period. In the case of the 1975, their sophomore album has had the lead single, Love Me, released on 8th of October 2015. And consequently, they have released the album 4 months later, on the 26th of February 2016. It's hard to say if the band had other reasons for the amount of album sales or other influences on the numbers that are really great that I didn't notice. Because to me, it seems like 1975 have quite a consistent buzz. They have quite a consistent fan base. It seems like they are not really going up or down dramatically. They're quite consistent with their following. They have sold 108,000 copies. 108,000 copies of albums within their first week. That's the report of Billboard 200 at least. Now onto their latest album, Notes in a Conditional Form. Got a lead single released in August on the 22nd of 2019, which is crazy because their album just came out in May of this year, which is 9 months. They had 9 months between their lead single and their final album being released. And of course, it's just a speculation. I don't know if it's relying specifically on that, but their latest album sold 54,000 copies in its first week, reported by Billboard again. So based on these numbers, it's clear that they obviously sold half of what they sold with their sophomore album. And you could argue that their first album had a very long promotional period. It had multiple releases. It was a few songs were released in an EP first, but I think that because they were a new band, that's more acceptable. There should be different types of approaches to promotional periods and promotional materials when you're dealing with a band that is releasing their first full-length album, and when you're dealing with a band that has had consistent success and has a fan base already. Nowadays, people's engagement online and the word of mouth online is your quickest way and the most reliable way to spread the word about your work. If you have been releasing stuff for a really, really long time, your fans are gonna get fatigued from that whole experience. They're not gonna be able to put in the same amount of work into promoting you, or not even work, but they're gonna have a really hard time keeping the same energy, same amount of passion for your new project over such a long period of time. People have their own lives going on, especially when you have a fan base that grew up. For example, your first album was less conceptual than the second, third, and fourth, and obviously the fan base is going to grow with the growth of the band. So you're not gonna have a bunch of teenagers who have a lot of time and a lot of passion for your band to keep on going with the whole promotional thing and keep the energy up at all times. So you have to think about your audience and how much they can afford to engage with your product. I think that the 1975 would have had a lot more success by cutting down the promotional period dramatically, I think. 4 months for the sophomore album worked. I don't know if they need all of that time for something very particular, but I think that they could get away with just having a very short promotional period before they release something, and then continue on promoting after the release date. People are very used to having the entire project available for them to explore whenever they want to. And I know that a lot of people are going to be saying things about our generation and how we don't have patience and all of that stuff, but it's not about patience, about oversaturation. And you can't keep the interest up for such a long period of time, because there's going to be so many other artists who are dropping albums almost immediately after they announce them. And especially being on the level that the 1975 is at, they have the opportunity to do so and to be successful without stretching it out so long and having so many artists take over the collective mind of people for periods of time. If you release something within 2 weeks and you give a lot of consumable music and videos and other things, you would get into people's lives a lot more in terms of just accompanying their existence, and you will be remembered for a longer period of time than spreading it out like that, where they only have one song that they heard, and if they didn't like it, for example, your lead single or something like that, they're not going to engage with you later on, and they're just gonna forget about you. So of course the lead singles are very important and other things like that, and we'll talk about it on in the other episodes of this series, where I'm gonna talk about other things that could have been done better or that are done really well. But in this case, I think that the 1975 are killing their own buzz and their fandom's excitement by taking such a long time with everything. You could have just announced that the album was coming at the end of the year and just forgot about it, and then released everything within 2 weeks, and then promoted it on television and radio stations and other stuff like that afterwards, so people hearing your single or singles after the release could go and engage with the entirety of the album immediately if they feel like doing so. You have to give more opportunity to people to engage with your product immediately after you announce it. Because considering the way that the media is working right now, with, for example, seasons of shows not being released for the entire year and then being dropped on the same day, people want to know that they can engage with the entirety of the project immediately after they hear about it, not because they're entitled to the things being done so quickly, but because they will forget about it, because there's just such an oversaturation of information in the world right now in general. So this is the first episode of this artist management series, and I'll be back soon with another one.